Hi, Carly. Thank you for joining me this morning and my evening. It's a pleasure to have you here.
Hi, Chai. I'm so glad to be here. Thank you for having me.
Right. So I had the honor to read your amazing book, The Reckless Kind, on from NetGalley, and it was such an amazing read for me. So I wanted to begin first by asking a little about you. If you could give us an introduction to yourself and also then tell us a little about the book.
Sure. So my name is Carly Heath. I'm the author of The Reckless Kind, and I've been a teacher. And those of you who read The Reckless Kind know that animals are a big part. So I love animals.
Right.
Um, and I've been, working on this book for a number of years when I
Okay.
first kind of decided I wanted to get into writing and publishing.
Right.
And The Reckless Kind is about three queer teens in 1904, a fictional Scandinavian country that's very near to Norway and very similar to Norway.
Okay.
And they go out on their own and decide to kind of defy the expectations of their society and their parents. And they live on their own. And eventually they have to defeat the town patriarch in the winter horse race in order to win enough money for their farm. But
Absolutely.
they are all queer, and they're disabled, and they certainly experience challenges in being who they are and wanting to live the way they want to live. But ultimately, they succeed because they love each other and they
Oh,
support each other.
absolutely. So it's so much fun because I remember when I got this book, I knew that so it was pitched to me as an MM relationship, which is why I picked it up. And for in my mind, I thought that this is a fantasy book. It's a historical fantasy. So when I started reading, and I was like, wait, is this fantasy? Is this not fantasy? And then once I realized that no, this is real, like it's fiction, like it's not fantasy. And that's when I was like, wow, like I went in with a completely different expectation and not having met that and yet being able to, love the book just as much as I would have loved had it been a fantasy was an amazing thing. So I wanted to know a little about the setting because it's so uniquely different to whatever that I have read or whatever that I have seen in the recent times. Like I don't think there's any book that's set in the Scandinavian countries for that matter. So could you, tell us a little about that?
Yeah, so thank you so much for bringing that up, because it's definitely with straight historical fiction. There's no magic. There's no there's no and it's really strongly, even though it's a fictional country, it is
Yeah,
very, very strongly like Scandinavian and Norway.
right.
I did add some of my own cultural elements that are specific to the fictional country it takes place in. There's certain traditions, and there's certain things that are kind of based on some Norwegian traditions and some pagan traditions, but that are tweaked slightly to be specific to the specific country. And so I guess I can kind of start with like why did I write this in like a Scandinavian country? And it kind of started back when I read Kristin Lavransdatter by Sigrid Undset, which
Okay.
is a really old book that was written in the 1920s, and it won the Nobel Prize for Literature. It was a very famous book in in the
Okay.
early 1900s.
Right.
And I read it, and it's very captivating, and the setting is amazing, and
Yeah.
it's so rich, and the characters are so rich, but it's very not feminist at all. The whole the whole lesson of Kristin Lavransdatter is that if you defy your parents, you will suffer for it. And so as I was conceptualizing this, I loved the setting of Kristin
Yeah.
Lavransdatter. I love the characters, and I love, like, it's very passionate. It's like a very passionate book,
Right.
but I hated the theme. So The Reckless Kind is kind of like Kristin Lavransdatter, but very feminist, very queer, and very pro-disabled. And the message is follow your heart. If people are restricting you, if your parents are restricting you, if your society is restricting you, connect with your friends, define them, live your own life. And the kids certainly experience guilt.
Right.
Because guilt is a technique that people in power use in order to control their children or control the people like women or
Right.
the people in society they want to
Right.
control. So
Right.
they certainly have to grapple with guilt, but ultimately they
Make
find the
their way.
support in each other.
Absolutely. No, that's very well put together. I like how, this book, I wish the author of the book that you're referring to would be alive. Imagine them reading your book as a response would be so interesting. So
Yeah.
while I was doing a little bit of research, about this interview about you, I kind of came across the fact that you also do a lot of interviews with other authors. You're kind of also a booktuber yourself. So, so how's the journey like, like to be on the other side of the interview table?
You are a great interviewer and you make your interviewees feel very comfortable. So I appreciate it so much. Um, I try as an interviewee, I try not to say a whole lot, but it's when someone asks me the questions, I'm like, I have to do a little of that mental stuff in my head. Whereas,
Absolutely.
you plan out your questions ahead of time, you ask it, so there's a little bit more thinking that has to be involved on my end.
Right,
You
right.
get to do the preparation. I have to do like on the fly thinking of what my answer is going to be. So that's a little bit, it's a little
Tougher.
bit different. It's
Different,
kind
but
of
it's
fun.
fun. I hope it's fun.
Yes, it's very fun. You're a really good interviewer.
Thank you, thank you. So, kind of moving back to the book now, I wanted to, when I was reading, I was like, how come every single character is disabled? Like, not in a negative way, but like, I was just surprised because never have I ever read a book with, with like all the three main leads are kind of, disabled, and that's such a good thing because you're kind of empowering, people with disabilities. So I wanted to know like what kind of, like background was it, or like where did the idea come in from? Like do you know somebody personally who's, disabled? So just on that.
Well, here's the thing. In real life, like you can probably attest to this too. Think of your friend group. Think of the people that you hang out with every day. I personally do not know anyone who is not disabled. Like everyone I know has some sort of disability, whether it's anxiety, depression, whether it's something you can't see or whether it is something that you can see. I mean, I have friends that deal with really difficult menstrual cycles, which is a disability. I personally am hearing impaired. Right now, I'm wearing hearing aids. I don't know
Okay.
if you
Yeah.
can see it, but it's one of those things that people can't really see.
Yeah.
But I also have post-concussion syndrome, like Fred does in the book. And that's also something that people probably wouldn't know about me while I'm
Absolutely.
just living life. I also have a spinal injury like Gunnar does. And that's also something that probably people don't see when they meet me and they hang out with me every day. And I have a weird thing with my arm as well. My hand doesn't straighten, and I have kind of some numbness in my arm from breaking
Yeah.
it. And these are all things like I have multiple disabilities, but people probably don't know this. And there are my friends who I hang out with every day. They also have multiple disabilities. But when you read fiction and you read books, every character, it seems like in a lot of books, is
Yeah. Perfect.
completely able, and you don't see these things that people just have and deal with every day represented. And so really it's not like a me making a conscious decision. It's like I'm just representing reality. Like people in real life are disabled, and maybe they don't think of themselves as disabled, but they are, and
Right.
they deal with these things.
Right.
And I personally believe society should normalize the idea that most people are not completely 100% fully abled, and we should make a society that accommodates everyone's diverse experience with
Absolutely.
various levels of disability.
Yeah.
It's my philosophical belief. But yeah, I'm basically just representing reality, and especially in 1904, there wasn't healthcare. Well, healthcare today is crap,
Correct.
but healthcare back then was very much based in like superstition, and healing someone from something,
Yep.
it was not something that was possible. So people would, break an arm and it would be amputated. Someone would have a spinal injury, and it was like, well, if you believe in God, God will heal you. Or if you are a sinner, then you're just going to suffer. Like that was kind of the belief. If you are suffering, it's because you've sinned in some
Yeah.
way.
Yeah.
And if you're a woman with a disability, and this is really interesting, women with disabilities really, really had it tough, because in those sorts of European societies, women were the caretakers. And so if a man was disabled, women would take care of that disabled man. But if a woman is disabled, she's still expected to do the work that needs to be done. And if she's not married, make a living for herself, she's not going to have someone to take care of her. And that's kind of something that Asta talks about a little bit.
She does.
How kind of privileged the male disabled characters are, because Gunnar has Erland, and Erland's going to take care of him, but she's a woman. She doesn't have anyone who's going to take care of her.
Absolutely.
She's just, and there's also an interesting thing as well with disabled women feeling that they should be grateful for anyone who is like looking past their disability.
Absolutely.
So Asta has Waardenburg syndrome, which gives her an atypical appearance, and that's an unconventional appearance. She's also hard of hearing, like I am, and eugenics was kind of a thing that was talked about in the early 1900s. Okay. And eugenics is the idea that you shouldn't pass on your imperfect traits, right? And so this boy who wants to marry her is telling her, aren't you grateful that I look past your strange appearance and your hard of hearing, and I don't believe that our offspring are going to have your negative traits.
Yeah.
And she's like, maybe I should feel grateful for him, but you can tell that there's something inside her that's like, I think what he's saying is kind of
messed up.
There's something uncomfortable about that.
Yeah.
And then eventually she comes to the place where she realizes that she needs to escape him. And
yeah. No, I love how you kind of said that all of us have disabilities, and that's such a strong message out there, because I mean, I would like to correct myself, because when I went into this book, I had a very different idea of what disability is like. Like, I thought maybe somebody has somebody's amputated, or somebody cannot hear, or somebody, this general conventional disabilities which we have. And that's partly because of how society and media has represented people with disability in general. So I love how you said that, each one of us are disabled in our own lives. I mean, I have major illness anxiety, and COVID-19 has just, spiked it up to an all-time high. So I totally get, what you say. And that's such a, like a wonderful way to put it out there, that that helps you stop the stigmatization of just people who have overt forms of disability. So, just like trying to stop the demarcation.
Yeah, when we otherize disability, it then puts less pressure on society to change things. Right. I think the statistic is like 1 in 5 people is disabled.
Absolutely.
But when you label things as disabled, and it becomes something that's apart from the norm, apart from the average. Like by default, if the default is abled and then the deviation is disabled, then that doesn't put any onus on society to accommodate the diverse experiences of people. And it's like, okay, well, if you can't meet this way that things are, then
Yeah,
there's something
yeah.
wrong with you rather than there being something wrong with society and the
Society
systems
in
of society, right?
absolutely. Yeah.
So I would say, like, if anyone's watching, like, are you disabled? Chances are you probably are. I
Yeah.
mean,
Yeah.
you probably, maybe there's even, if it's something little, like there's food that you can't eat because it gives you a stomach ache, or maybe
An allergy or something. Yeah. Yeah.
and maybe it's like, you have a hard time walking upstairs
Yeah.
and things like that. Pressure should be on society to fix the structures at work
Absolutely. Yeah.
rather than
Yeah.
trying to make people
People. Yeah.
accommodate the structures that already exist.
Wow. That's a beautiful message. So, yes, on that note, I wanted to also touch upon the queer representation that's done in here. And it's a beautiful romance as well. So, where is that coming from? Like, how much of you do you read romances?
Yeah, well, I personally identify as on the asexual spectrum.
Okay.
And that's I love all these like labels that are coming out,
Hmm.
and I I also bristle a little bit against labels because people don't really fit into any of them.
Right.
Like, sometimes I think, well, maybe I'm aromantic, asexual. And then sometimes I like, maybe I'm panromantic, asexual, or
Yeah.
maybe maybe I just find like feminine aesthetics attractive. Like it's something that kind of like changes. I'm not really even sure what my own identity is, but I
Absolutely.
personally wanted to kind of represent that because it's 1904. There's no language to describe what these kids' experiences are. I think the main relationship is the three-way relationship between the three
Main character.
kids, and they're really I mean, I would say the main relationship is a queer platonic triad because it's a very deep, profound relationship where they live together, they support each other, they love each other, nothing will break apart their bond, and that is kind of the root of everything. The two male characters are like in a romantic relationship, a romantic and sexual relationship, and the girl character definitely started out the book with a very strong platonic love with Gunnar, and eventually that relationship with Erland
Yeah.
builds as well. So I I part of it's like when you're writing a book, the characters just kind of come to you and you just start writing them, and so you, without really imposing your your worldview on them. But there's also like I wanted to represent the diverse, complex, not quite defined experience that many people experience, where they're where a relationship is possible that's not just a heterosexual, two people monogamous type relationship, but it's more complex and embraces the fact that a really powerful meaningful relationship doesn't have to have sex, it doesn't have to have romance, and it doesn't have to just be between two
Two
people.
people. Yeah. Yeah, that's what I said. Like when I was reading it, it was so uniquely different from everything that I have read personally. And there was this one time when I really wanted to like look into more books which do not have monogamy, even though like I'm a very firm believer in monogamy. But I love to read books with polyamorous relationships and open relationships. So I was kind of looking forward to them, and I didn't get too many recommendations. And whatever I did get weren't like really popular books. Like they were all indie titles, which is not to say that indie titles are bad, but like you get the drill, right? Like how many of us
Yeah.
pick indie titles over the traditional titles? So
I
yeah.
have some recommendations for
please
you.
please
So
give it to us.
So I want everyone to keep an eye out for Fire Becomes Her by Rosie Thor, coming out early next year. It's set in it's like a 1920s fantasy vibe,
Okay,
and it's the main character is a romantic, and she's kind of coming to a realization that she was in like a traditional like hetero relationship, and she's starting to realize that that's not really what she wants.
right.
And I guess I shouldn't give away spoilers,
No, no,
but it
yeah.
embraces queer platonic relationships
Ah,
in a
I
really great
see.
way. And so that's Fire Becomes Her by Rosie Thor, who also wrote Tarnished Are the Stars. I also definitely want you to check out All Out by Sandra Mitchell. Uh, this
Absolutely.
is this is a
Wow, the cover is
anthology of,
gorgeous.
yeah, it's an anthology of queer teens in historical settings, and there's a lot of diverse representation in this book, so it's really great. Um, and I have like all my books here that I want people to see and check out.
Yes,
So that's why I put
these
them here.
these are Carly's recommendation. Please make a note of it. You all can see the titles. Yes.
Yeah, I
So
think you get see them really
yeah,
well.
yeah. So on that note, what would you like? You kind of already have summarized the message of the book, but like on a parting note, what is the message that you would want your readers to kind of, take away from this book? What do you want them to remember?
Well, I think the most important thing is defiance. And if there's any situation where you are restricted, and where you're feeling like someone, whether it's parent, family member, or someone in your society who just makes you feel like there's just something not quite right there,
Yeah,
trust your heart, trust your instincts, connect with the people that really are that make you feel good and that do
absolutely.
support you, and detach from the people who make you feel like there's something not quite right there. And the thing
Yeah,
is, the way oppression works and the way toxic relationships work is people will say things that sound good, like the way that Niels says, "Aren't you grateful that I overlook all this in you?" But true supportive relationships, you feel it,
yeah,
right? So
yeah,
so
yeah.
you it's really, really important to follow your heart, defy your parents,
Right.
defy your society, and live your best life.
Absolutely. Absolutely. On that note, I know it's a little too early to ask because The Reckless Kind comes out on the 2nd of November, 2021, if I'm not wrong.
Mhm.
So what are the future plans? Like, are you already in work in progress with another book, another story? What's up?
Yeah, so I was actually supposed to send my next book to my agent like a couple days ago, but I keep on reading it over and over again and making revisions as one does.
Yes.
But my next book is a fantasy that's also set in a fictional
Yay.
Scandinavian society, but this
Yay.
time it has magic,
Okay.
and it's probably going to change because that's how everything goes in the publishing
Of course.
process.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
it is also a queer male-male relationship, and it's very it's a very it's a book where the relationship begins on the first chapter and stays throughout the whole book. So it's a supportive relationship throughout.
Ah,
It's about magic, and it's also about consent and feminism, and it's about how men need to empathize and support and be allies to not just the person that they love and that they feel a connection with, but to people in general, and how they can
generally.
use their
Yeah.
privilege
Yeah.
to
Yeah.
help others.
Right.
And it's about magic. It's kind of like, what should I say? It's like social justice sorcery.
Ah, wow. That's definitely something which I've never heard of, never read of. So I would love to check out how and what this is. Absolutely. But before that, once again, thank you so much for joining me today. This half an hour has been an absolute amazing discussion. And I wish you all the very best with your book, The Reckless Kind.
Thank you so much for having me, Chai. I really appreciate it.